Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the 2020 ASU GSV Summit, which is happening virtually this year, and welcome specifically to this session for a conversation on corporations leaning in, bringing 21st century learning to K-12 education. My name is Jason Galden. I'm CEO of the Untapped Potential Project. We are an ambitious startup developing a network of skills-based, career-focused high schools, with our first one set to open in Chicago next year. Before this role, I was with America Succeeds. That's a national coalition of business leaders working to modernize education. And in that role, I had the opportunity to co-author a report entitled The Age of Agility: Education Pathways for the Future of Work. In that report, we examined how advanced technologies, automation, artificial intelligence are fundamentally changing the nature of work. We examined in that report the skills gap that exists, where there's so many quality jobs, but somehow not enough workers to fill those great jobs. And then we examined what we see as a misalignment between what the education system produces and sometimes what the workforce actually needs. So all of that kind of sets the context for today's conversation, that intersection between education and workforce, and our need to modernize and improve those linkages. So let me just note one technical point. We are happy to answer your questions. We ask you to submit them through the chat log, and we'll keep an eye on those, and we'll interject your questions as best we can throughout this conversation. But let's dive in. I want to get to some introductions because we have a power-packed panel today. And what I really want to do is let each of them introduce themselves and give you a brief explanation of what their organization is and their role in it. So I'm just going to dive right on in, and we'll start with Jim.
Everybody, Jim Federico here. I'm a product manager at Microsoft in the education engineering team. My role is effectively to amplify the voice of K-12 and higher ed into everything we do here at Microsoft. And I'm responsible for a few products as well. Thanks, Jason.
Let's go to Tyson.
Thanks, happy to be here. Tyson Grover, I'm the STEM director for Davis School District. We're a large school district in Utah, just kind of north of Salt Lake. We have about 75,000 kids. And my role is to constantly be really systematic in analyzing our district and really building a strong K-12 STEM framework that gives kids awesome experiences to be able to wonder, make sense of the world, and solve problems, and be ready for whatever their life brings their way. That involves a lot of partnerships with people all around us in terms of industry and our tech colleges and universities and all of our different partners. And so our goal is really just to make sure that we have as much opportunity as possible for kids out there, especially in the STEM world.
Excellent.
Hey, Tyson, last time I was at Davis County School District, I saw JavaScript etched on the window in one of the new schools. Thought that was pretty cool. I felt like I belonged.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Corey, we'll go to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Corey Moan. I'm the executive director of the CAPS program, Center for Advanced Professional Studies. I'm sitting here in Kansas City, where we started the program about 12 years ago, but we actually now have a national network called CAPS Network, and we have programs in 19 states and 3 countries. And essentially what we're doing is working with high school students to connect them through profession-based learning and allowing them to kind of explore and have a self-discovery process to understand a little more about themselves and what makes them tick and what their purpose is in life to have a successful life and a happy one, making an impact on the world. So excited to be here for this conversation.
And last but not least, Ryan.
Thanks, Jason. My name is Ryan Kelly. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for Virgin Hyperloop. Hyperloop has been designated as the first new form of mass transportation in over 100 years. really excited to be on this panel today. As we look towards bringing this new mode of mass transportation, we also have to think about the ecosystem that it's going to create in the United States and abroad. And so STEM education is really near and dear to our hearts to inspire the next generation of astronauts, but right here on the ground working for Hyperloop. So my job is to filter complicated engineering and make sure that our policymakers, politicians, and the general public understands what the heck a Hyperloop is.
Oh, that's great. I am really excited to drill down on this conversation. But I want to start by giving our audience a little bit of insight into who you are and what drives you. So here's a question I want each of you to answer. Reflect back to your educational experience, any point along that journey, and tell me about a positive experience that really shaped you or motivated you or really catapulted you or kind of shaped or propelled you into where you are today or what you're doing today. I'd love to hear what point in your education was pivotal and inspirational. Let's start with you, Tyson.
Great. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking to a time where I had kind of found my purpose in terms of what education should actually be like. Sadly, it took me all the way until I was like 2 years into college to have that experience. But, I was 2 years into college and I was in a physics class and I was kind of wondering, like, what the heck are we doing in this class? Because it wasn't really about physics at all. And it was mostly about the way that we were interacting with each other and the problems that we were posed. And I think it was at that point that I kind of took a step back and realized, and I was also like a lot of people who just kind of, you just went to college and you didn't really even know where you were going. But at that point, though, I started realizing, that the education system is much more about the person and the way that you can solve problems and engage with the world. It's not about these isolated subject areas and these different things. It's about me becoming functional and being able to really engage with the world around me and the people around me. And I think that moment when I was in that class and I just got a taste of something a little different, that drove me to be, travel the education road and eventually land where I am now, where I get to try to, do that for 75,000 kids. So it's been great.
Jim, jump in.
I think for me, it might have been the big moment is during my internship in undergraduate. I had an opportunity to work for the U.S. Geological Survey as part of the Department of the Interior. And the only instruction I got was there's these monitors on rivers and data goes to a satellite and maybe you can do something with that data. I said, really? Like, I get to interface with a satellite and write code to chart like water levels over time and alert people when there might be potential flooding, and I get to help predict flooding? That sounds amazing. Like, I would do that for free, and did for a little while. That might have been the key catalyst moment for me, which is I got a specific problem that seemed way bigger than I could ever solve for, but was given the support to jump in and to solve it. So I was excited about that.
Ryan, what about you?
Sure. So I actually heard the end of the last conversation, and I think one of the last things that was said was, you can't be what you can't see. And obviously everyone's educational experience is different, but I went to a very small school in Pennsylvania. Not a lot of people left where they grew up, which is absolutely fine and appropriate. I had one teacher that ran the National Honor Society there and kind of plucked me out and said, hey, you've got some aptitude for public speaking, and would you want to be a part of the debate team and start that? And, was just a mentor to me. So allowed me to really drill into, I've never been a great math student, which is the irony of working at a place filled with rocket scientists doesn't elude me. But, the idea that communications and what I was able to achieve and where I would be able to go as well. So she was also able to talk about, are you looking at universities? Are you looking at scholarships and whatnot? And I think that if I didn't have that mentorship, I don't think I would have been able to see the opportunity. And it really gave me the confidence to push forward and know that, you know, I could have a path to do what I wanted to do. So thank you, Mrs. Bull, I guess. So
how about you, Corey?
Yeah, well, first I'll say, if Tyson thinks it was a long time to figure out purpose in college, he's well ahead of me. It took me until I was in my late 30s to have a revelation, which was almost a crash in my life, right? To get to a point where I'm like, why am I doing this? And what's the purpose of why I'm here, and all those things. And I think that's typically the experience that people have. It's not an A to B, a straight line path. It's a very curvy path with lots of bumps and almost a roller coaster of ups and downs. But my answer is very similar to Jim's. When I was in college, I had an opportunity to intern. I was also with, and I'm trying to remember, Jim, you said the National Geologic,
yeah.
You're in DC?
Yeah, headquartered in DC. I was in Ithaca, New York.
Okay. So I was interning in DC when I was an undergrad, and actually I had a chance to intern, and it was kind of a random opportunity, but I had the chance to be an intern at the White House. And I was so overwhelmed. I mean, I was excited about it because I was a political science student and an economics student. And I thought, man, what a great opportunity to be right in the mix of all this. But I was so intimidated. And there was something about having a semester where I had access and opportunity and my comfort zone was pushed. But there was always this sense that what I was doing was real and that it mattered. And stepping through that process over the course of months to get to the end and say, oh my gosh, look at all these things. I mean, I learned without even knowing I was learning because I was doing. Yep. And that is a reflection now that I work in this education world of our students and why it's so important that we make connections for students to have a self-discovery process and see what's out there and then try some things that maybe they are uncomfortable doing initially. But those are experiences that stay in your mind. I will never forget that experience. I remember it vividly. I can remember exact days and moments. And I think that that is what will stick with students, not, what's the formula that we need in this calculation in Algebra 2. That's probably not going to stick.
Yep. Listen, this is a theme that I've heard throughout those answers and a really important part of, again, that intersectionality between learning and earning, so to speak. Let's dive deeper into the matter at hand. I've not talked to a business leader in the last several years that hasn't put talent pipeline at the top of their list of concerns. Just needing talent. It's a big problem. It requires new and creative solutions because, frankly, the status quo just doesn't produce enough work-ready opportunity seekers into the workforce. And so there's a big problem about skilling folks up, and how can we better do that, and how can we go upstream and do it at an earlier stage. So I just want to start with the business perspective, and then we'll move to the education perspective. But let's hear from Jim and Ryan about how Microsoft and Virgin Hyperloop are confronting these issues and these talent pipeline challenges. We'll start with you, Jim.
All right. Well, I think one of the key challenges, and I agree with you, by the way, like talent pipeline is everything. And one of the key challenges we have in tech, which I think is true in other sectors as well, is to ensure that the makeup of our workforce represents the makeup of those who we serve. I'm in the education product team, and I'm an engineer. I'm not a teacher. And so I spend a lot of time just sitting in the back of classrooms observing, working extra hard so that I can understand these mythical creatures that I have so much respect for and empathize for what they go through every day, K-12 and higher ed. And I work extra hard to just listen. And we hire actual educators on the education product team that have more depth than I do to make sure that all of the sensibilities are considered, while also trying to identify the go forward trends, because building products takes time, and we want to be in front of trends when we can. And of course, during the pandemic, this has been an interesting time for us. We want to meet all of our users exactly where they are, while ensuring that we've got a place for them sort of going forward, and we can bring them along the journey. So certainly having a makeup of our workforce that represents the makeup of our user base is really key. And then it sort of comes down to the culture of the institution. I always believe that, like, diverse sets of people, multidisciplinary, diverse people sort of coming together that are highly empowered, that can do epic things. And at Microsoft, we talk a lot about our big, bold goals and our sort of epic things that we go accomplish. And none of that's possible without sort of the right makeup of the right team and the right culture to support it.
I couldn't agree more. For me, I'm certainly at my best when I'm part of a highly effective team. So point well taken, Jim. I want you to jump in, Ryan. What are your thoughts about talent pipeline and how that, how your company is confronting and trying to meet that challenge?
Yeah, so we've got a couple challenges. One being that this is a new category and thus a new ecosystem. And so there's challenges there, but there's also opportunities. And so actually, I want to give a quick example of news that just broke today, Jason. We actually announced with Richard Branson, John Chambers, the governor, 2 senators, and Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao today that we are going to build a $500 million Hyperloop certification center to regulate and certify this new form of mass transit. And so obviously there will be huge amount of jobs that are needed in West Virginia. Appalachia has seen a 13% decrease in manufacturing jobs. They have been suffering there. So when we're thinking about jobs, we actually run the gamut of construction workers, because this is infrastructure, all the way through your software engineers.
Yep.
And so you have an entire ecosystem, which means we're not just talking about your Ivy League folks. We're talking about technical schools, and trying to create an ecosystem to get people excited about this, either bring people into West Virginia, but I think even more importantly, working with Marshall, West Virginia University, and their technical programs to create curriculum that will prepare them for this type of job opportunity. And not only that, transferable skills. We're literally building this center on old minefields, which is pretty crazy, especially given that we want to be the most sustainable mass transportation system in the world. And so there are people that are out of work that also need to be retrained as well. So education doesn't stop, after the age of 21 when you leave university or get your master's degree. These are people that are out of work that need to be retrained. And so we're thinking all ages, all types of jobs, all types of education, and that requires partnership with the state, as well as public and private institutions in order to do that. So that's why we're so interested in education, STEM education, and being a part of the curriculum K all the way up. Because the other problem is that you have people leaving. So you have some brain drain in some of these areas that are going to the coasts. And so how can we entice people to stay and get them excited about their careers? And so that is a huge challenge, but also a really exciting one for the community. I also want to mention one of the things that we're also looking at is diversity and inclusion. So while Black people make up 13% of the population, only 2% of engineering managers are Black. And we are actually putting together a scholarship program specifically to bring Black engineers along to places in the Virgin Group, not only Virgin Hyperloop, but Virgin Orbit and Virgin Galactic, and giving them an opportunity and scholarship to do a rotational program. And hopefully we can bring in this diverse talent, which is so desperately needed, specifically in the engineering field as well.
Fantastic. And we'll is a great pivot as I move to our education experts to get some perspective. But I want to remind anyone, all of our audience and participants, that you are welcome to submit any questions you have in the chat log, and we'll be sure to get to those. So next question. How does education continuously meet the ever-changing real-time needs of employers? And to be clear, this is not a matter of schools serving as an assembly line to churn out workers for the industry. It's about aligning interests to create a win-win scenario. Students want and need these incredible jobs and career opportunities just as much as businesses need talented, well-rounded workers. So that's the challenge we face. What's the best way to balance that out? Realizing that it's all relative. It's all very localized. And so schools and districts are in a position of needing to kind of tailor and customize their offerings to meet local or regional workforce demand. And I just want to hear from a couple innovators, education innovators, on how to best go about that. I'd love to start with you, Tyson, and tell us about what Davis School District is doing to tackle this challenge.
Great, thanks for letting me chat about this for a little bit. I'm going to try to keep it within the time frame because that's the big question, right? I'm sure that Corey and I both could sit here and talk your ear off for the next 2 days on this subject. But I think one thing that's really important is if you listen, we listen to Ryan and we listen to Jim, that they didn't really say, we need somebody to come up here that's really good at geology, or we need somebody that's, amazing in this particular subject area. What they were talking about is that they need people who can function in a group really well and who can be given unknown real world problems and be able to go through a process of trying to figure that out. And that can work with other people. And that if given the right scenario, can use those skills that they've developed in order to really innovate and take things to the next level. I mean, different disciplines and different jobs obviously need different kind of backgrounds in terms of their understanding of different sciences and different tech and things like that. But the underlying necessary root skills really are the way that you communicate, the way that you can collaborate, the way that you innovate and are able to work with a team in terms of like making sense of why things happen and being able to solve problems, and not just solve problems, but being able to identify problems and look at it. So I know in Corey's world and in my world both, our goal really is to look at our whole system and provide as much opportunity from the bottom to the top, so kindergarten through 12th and past that, for kids to engage in those kinds of activities. And so, my role primarily is to really analyze the STEM climate of our district, and then to look at, where do we have holes within that framework, and where is there a particular grade level, or is there a particular school or a particular area where they're not getting the opportunity to really work on their wonder, their sense making, and their problem solving. In Davis, when we think about STEM, we don't necessarily think about science, technology, engineering, and math. We think more about what actually underlies those letters, which is the ability to wonder about why things are the way they are, have the skills and abilities to be able to make sense of what's happening, and then be able to use that all in some sort of problem solving situation around something that's real. And so, like Corey said, kids being given the opportunity to work on things that feel real and feel like they mean something, yep, versus just learning something in class is the big difference. And so, one thing that we've done recently is we've partnered with Microsoft to take their Hacking STEM curriculum and push that into courses across our entire junior high realm, which is like 17 junior high schools. Because, from an organizational standpoint, we identified by analyzing our district that there was a gap in our 7th and 8th grades where that kind of learning wasn't a whole lot of opportunity there. And so, getting at what we're trying to all talk about here is that, school districts can't do this on their own. It has to be, a societal effort for us to do this. So, people in my role need to be reaching out to people in like Jim and Ryan's roles, and they need to also be looking back the other way. And we're not trying to build a pipeline we're trying to build opportunities for kids to work on these fundamental skills to be a functional human as we go through our life. And if we can do that, I mean, we'll have huge amounts of students who are leaving our institution who have more than enough skill to be able to jump into a wide variety of jobs. Like Ryan was saying earlier, he never thought he'd be, working on marketing it for a Hyperloop company. He didn't go to school for that. He didn't think when I'm in middle school, I'm gonna go work for a Hyperloop, right? It didn't exist. So it's about developing the student as a human. And if you can do that, if you can do that well, then all the problems are solved at that point.
Let me do a follow-up question before we move on to Corey, Tyson. Then, actually, I'll challenge both of you, Tyson and Corey. Should STEM track education or CTE education, should it be differentiated? Should it be something that is set aside and considered something other than, or should it be somehow universally embedded in a new way into the educational experience?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on this one. Because it fits into what I was going to share to your previous question, which is there is a trap in the K-12 education system around one size fits all. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we feel like we have to come up with an answer that will fit every student, every school, every district. I'm not saying we shouldn't scale great ideas. I think we should. But what I am saying is it's a little bit foolish for us to think here is the one way or the two ways in which we want to engage with business partners, and then we just seek out those individual ways instead of what Tyson just said, which is how do we reach out in such a way that we're having a conversation about win-win possibilities with people like Jim and Microsoft and people like Ryan and Hyperloop. I'll give a couple of examples, in fact, that involve these two in their organizations. So, Hyperloop is working right now on a really relevant curriculum that involves physics and other elements of science and STEM, but it directly relates to what's happening real time with Hyperloop and the technology behind that. Kids are very intrigued. Adults are intrigued by what they're doing. Why wouldn't we want to partner and be a part of that? I just saw Jim's hand go up. He's intrigued by it. And so it's been fun to have conversations with Ryan and his partner in crime, Sarah, over at Hyperloop to say, how can CAPS help open that up for students, especially if they're younger than the high school age where we do most of our work, to give that exposure. But that may not be the right answer when we talk to someone at Microsoft. And so, for example, in the Charlotte area, we're working with the Blacks at Microsoft team in that area. We've identified a high school that wants to move forward with additional profession-based learning. And so we're going to bring the CAPS element of profession-based projects to that high school, but we're going to tandem it with the Blacks at Microsoft support around exposure to careers and what does it mean to work at Microsoft and what is this technology and all of this. And so, but those are conversations. Those are not technical solutions. Those are adaptive conversations. And as much as we have unbelievably awesome people in education, what I've found is there's a fear factor often with educators around reaching out for fear that we look like we're asking for too much, when in reality, business partners hardly ever say no. They are very motivated to do things that they think move the needle for the general good, but also for their companies and their brands. And so it's, and I'll leave with this. We had a superintendent once in our network that once said, the problem in education is for years we've approached people with our hand out like this, when in reality we should have turned it 90 degrees and made it like this. And it's a handshake, not a handout. And if that's your approach, you can do amazing things and make it more custom to what your students need.
Yeah, I would totally agree with all of that. I'd like to jump in with one thing, if that's all right.
Please.
One thing with this that I think is really important is that this whole idea of STEM and STEM education and CTE, the idea of STEM kind of isolates it into this little bubble, right? That, and what we see a lot in the education world is say a kid has a poor math identity and has a hard time with math, they kind of almost immediately at that point disassociate themselves with STEM. So they basically say, I'm not a STEM kid at that point. Because it puts it into a clump when we start to associate it with those content areas. So what we've tried really hard to do in Davis is show our teachers and promote to them that STEM, yes, it stands for acronyms of content areas, but when we talk about STEM, this is an instructional process. It's a classroom culture. And the culture is about, like I said, those indicators of making sense of the world and solving problems. And we can do that in any content area. I could do that in a language arts class. We could do that in any CT class. We can do it in any professional class, because it's not about the content that you're trying to learn. It's about how you're engaging with the people around you. And a true STEM teacher, if I was to walk into a classroom and be like, you're an amazing STEM teacher, I would see that teacher guiding those students in a process of gathering evidence to make sense of things, having conversations about their evidence, talking about the problem at hand, designing solutions to that problem, sharing those out and making it real and making it mean something. And that would be the real indicator for me. And it would be in any class. Doesn't matter what the content area is.
Yep. We're starting to get questions in the log, but we're starting to get into this, but I want to go a little bit deeper. So there's this historic rancor and resistance about having business in schools or business in the classrooms. There's an idea that that's a tricky balance or sometimes inherently bad. It's a notion that you shouldn't connect schooling with the notion of the end result being to get a job, because schooling is more than that, education is more than that, which I'm sure we all agree with and understand. But at the same time, learning should be relevant to the real world and what opportunities exist now and will exist in the future. So there's something about striking a balance. At the same time, at play are some other factors. One, a lot of times there's a college for all mindset and mantra in our society that says everyone should go to a traditional college and get a 4-year degree. But that hasn't exactly proven true. Not all of these great technical related jobs require a 4-year college degree. College degrees are great. They're fantastic. We need them, particularly to the point of engineering. That is an advanced education route that's necessary. But not all fulfilling quality jobs require that. So there's that complex and sometimes controversial conversation that happens in education. And I just want to hear from each of you what has been your experience and interface with that issue. And let's bring Jim back into the conversation.
I certainly agree. I think providing students these days with multiple pathways, other types of skilled jobs, service jobs, all of which are necessary and all of which can really provide for a lot of fulfillment. I think it's also true that many students, myself included, just don't know at a young age, and it's stressful. Senior year in high school, when the world's sort of putting pressure on you to pick a career that you're going to be in forever. When in fact, that's no longer really true. Like many of us end up hopping careers as we find and explore new passions. And that should be encouraged. Like, I think of talent more of a river than a pond, in that it should flow, through multiple organizations. I'm also a proponent, by the way, of bringing back internships for older people like me. Like, I think that would be fantastic. So I think we could do the reverses as well and include people who are later in their career to be more of a river than a pond at the same time. There's some of my thinking.
Yep. Ryan, jump in here.
I love that internship idea. We should talk about that. That's a really cool one, especially with what
a week or something.
You're just job swap. Brian, I don't know anything about Hyperloop. Maybe you'll let me drive it someday. It'll be fine. Trust me.
Can we do that next year? Why don't we do a job swap and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it? how it went. Yeah, so I think there's a couple things, and I'm not representing the company here. This is just my own opinion, but I think that when we're talking about pushback from brands, you're going to have some. So Hyperloop, I'm really lucky. This is something where, as Corey mentioned, we're talking about curriculum where we can show a test run of a Hyperloop that gets kids really excited. We get letters from kids. I want to ride a Hyperloop. I want to work at Hyperloop. That kind of thing, and then we can explain the physics behind how magnetic levitation works and things of that nature. That allows us to have that conversation. If I was a cereal company, I don't know if I would have that opportunity. So, I think that some plays are more than others. I think that it is not to put it back on the educators, but I think it is the role of the educator in that handshake to say when it's too much. If you have a marketing person that's coming in and I want everyone to wear a Virgin Hyperloop shirt and do testimonials about how great Hyperloop is going to be for your community, and try to win brownie points, maybe that's a time for someone to say, hey, actually, this doesn't work. In the same way that a journalist, their responsibility, if I'm pitching them a story that has no journalistic integrity and is just an advertising push, they should push back and say, no, this is not what we're here to do. So I think there's a mutual respect there. I don't see why not, having those conversations to inspire, especially when we're talking about what were those educational moments. And I think about if someone came into me and said, this is what I do for a living, and I haven't even thought about something like that, I could see myself, aspiring, to something that I thought was cool and exciting. Great. And if it's not something I find cool and exciting and we can put it in a curriculum so what magnetic levitation is and how it works, then we check a box there as well. So I think that there has to be a balance, but I think really the educators can set those guidelines, and I think that brands will respect that.
Yep. Corey.
Yeah, well, to Ryan's last point there, they absolutely do respect it. And that's been our experience with CAPS, is when we set up client projects where essentially we're putting students in a position where they're consultants to businesses and nonprofits and startups, and therefore have a project they can work, unlike the internship model which we do as well. But, where if you're exclusively in an internship model, you're putting a lot of, I don't want to say pressure, but you're putting a lot on the employer in terms of supervision, in terms of thinking about how do I give this student relevant work. It's a lot to think about and a lot to commit to. A project model where you can do client work, you are freeing them up a little bit more. But what we found in doing that and working with these companies and with nonprofits is they absolutely will respect the proper scope of a project, the proper interaction of the organization with the students. We've really hardly ever had a problem with that. But to the question, I think that it's a good question in that we have to be careful not to restrict students too much in terms of their path. And it was mentioned earlier, how does an 8th grader or a 9th grader know what in the world they want to do when they get older, when we're all still pivoting in our careers and what we do? So I think a really important thing to keep in mind is, how do we develop the skill sets that we know are going to help people be successful regardless of what industry they're in at any given time? And so those are things like time management, project management, teamwork, right? How do you get along with people who are different than you, that have different skill sets? How do you even know what your own strengths are and what the strengths are of other people? How do you respect that and leverage it and use it in such a way that it helps you as opposed to drive you crazy, which we've all been on those teams where we just don't understand why someone functions and works the way they do. And so I believe strongly that you can build a model that interacts with business, that allows students to see elements of what it means to be in a business and explore that, but do it in such a way that you allow for flexibility and pivotability, and kind of to to wrap up the answer, one of the 5 core values that we have in our CAPS program is responsiveness. And so we pride ourselves and feel like we have to be responsive, not only to our industry partners, but to our students when they have a discovery. If they have a self-discovery that I've tried this, I got a good experience, but it's really not for me, it's not what I want to do with my life, why would we tell them, well, you've already got all your prereqs in engineering, so you're going to have to take another semester of that? That doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
So figure out, if I were giving advice to other K-12 and educator stakeholders, I would say, figure out ways to build into the system methods by which students can pivot and teachers can pivot. I think that is essential. You don't have to lose the career interaction component. You don't have to lose the depth of it. You just need to make it a little more off-ramps.
Yep.
And ways to move. Yeah.
Excellent. As we feared, time goes by really fast. We're down to our last 3 minutes. And so interestingly, in your natural answers, you actually addressed questions that were coming into the chat log. So great job. We talked about companies looking beyond traditional ways of getting talent in the door. We talked a bit about another question that came in was some of the biggest barriers to creating alignment between K-12 and employer needs at a systemic level. So you all naturally hit some of those points, but what in the last 2 minutes, quick lightning round, what are your closing thoughts? What are your final statements about this intersection between aligning education and training with actual real-time and future workforce needs? Give us your final thoughts. Let's start with you, Ryan.
I think getting kids excited about what they're doing and having a lesson behind it and inspiring people is what it's really all about for me. And so the more that we can do that, and I love the idea of handshake versus handout, that we can work together to do that. I can't tell you how many engineers and people are so excited to be working on these projects and these videos. We're all on board with you guys. So yeah, yep. Let's work together.
Tyson.
I think I would just echo that it's all about the relationships and the way that we build those. And it has to come at an organizational level. And so, anybody who's listening, who's works for a school district, a charter school, or any sort of educational entity, and you are in some sort of leadership role within that group, it's your responsibility to be active with reaching out, to be active with analyzing your system and finding partners who can help you fill any gaps that you have, like we have with Microsoft. It's your responsibility to do that. And I think the more that education agencies and the leaders in those groups can do that, the better off we'll be.
And I'm sorry, I think we're going to have to leave it there. I think we're going to have to sign off. But thank you all so very much for this very engaging, very rich conversation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for leading us,
Thank you,
Jason.
everyone.